The evidence is already with the FBI.
Federal agents! Hands where we can see them!
The passenger behind me had been kicking my seat for almost 10 minutes. I was tired, angry, and trying to keep my 8-month-old son asleep against my chest. Then his wooden teething ring rolled under my seat. I reached down to pick it up, and a bruised woman's hand slid out of the darkness behind me. On her finger was a silver wedding band shaped like intertwined ivy vines. There was only one ring like it in the world. I had placed it on my wife Sarah's finger 5 years earlier. The United States military had told me Sarah was dead. My name is David Cole. I was 36 years old when this happened. I had served 6 years as an Army medic before leaving the military and building a quieter life as a cybersecurity consultant in Maryland. Sarah was 34, an intelligence officer, and the strongest person I had ever known. Before I tell you what happened on that flight, you need to understand why seeing her ring nearly stopped my heart. 17 months earlier, Sarah had left for what was supposed to be a short classified assignment overseas. Neither of us knew that she was in the earliest weeks of pregnancy. Her helicopter disappeared over hostile territory 3 days after she arrived. For 9 months, I lived between hope and grief. Officials called her missing in action. They gave me careful answers that said nothing. Then, one rainy evening, 2 officers came to my door carrying a newborn baby wrapped in a white hospital blanket. The baby was our son, Toby. They told me a special operations team had raided an underground prison. Sarah had given birth while being held there. During the rescue, enemy fighters trapped the team in a narrow corridor. Sarah picked up a weapon and held the passage long enough for a wounded soldier to escape with Toby. Minutes later, the compound collapsed under mortar fire. No one found Sarah's body. The military declared her dead and called her sacrifice heroic. They gave me a medal in a velvet box and a folded flag. I would have thrown both into the ocean for one more minute with her. 8 months after Toby came home, I gave up the house Sarah and I had shared. Every room had become a museum of a future we would never have. I booked a flight to Seattle, where my sister had offered us a place to stay while I learned how to be a father without falling apart. That was how Toby and I ended up on Flight 402. The cabin lights were low. A Toby slept in a carrier against my chest while a storm shook the plane over the Rocky Mountains. For several minutes, the aircraft dropped and rolled hard enough to make the overhead bends rattle. When the turbulence finally passed, everyone around me relaxed. But the seat behind me kept moving. Thud, then another thud. At first, I thought the passenger was rude. Then the rhythm became faster and less controlled. It was not kicking. Someone was trembling so violently that their knees kept striking my seat. Toby woke and began to cry. I whispered to him, but his wooden toy slipped from my hand and rolled backward. When I reached underneath the seat, I saw that thin, scarred hand and the ivy ring. My first thought was that grief had finally broken my mind. I sat up slowly. My hands were shaking. I told myself thousands of silver rings existed. I told myself I had slept only 3 hours in the past 2 days. I told myself Sarah was buried beneath a destroyed prison half a world away. But I had designed that ring myself. One ivy leaf was slightly larger, because I had made a mistake in the sketch. Sarah loved the flaw and refused to let the jeweler correct it. The hand behind me wore that exact ring. I pressed the flight attendant button. A young flight attendant named Emily came down the aisle. I pointed behind me and tried to keep my voice steady. The passenger in the next row is shaking. I think she needs help. Emily stepped around my seat. She looked at the woman in 4B, and every bit of color left her face. She did not ask the woman if she was all right. She backed away, covered her mouth, and hurried toward the front galley. That reaction frightened me more than the ring. I unfastened my seat belt and stood with Toby secured against me. My legs felt weak as I turned around. A woman was curled beside the window under an oversized olive jacket. Her blonde hair had been cut short and uneven. Her cheeks were hollow. Bruises covered her wrists, and a healing cut crossed her forehead. It was Sarah. She was alive. For one perfect second, I believed the nightmare was over. "Sarah," I whispered. "It's me. It's David." Her eyes lifted toward my face, but there was no recognition in them. She looked at Toby, and terror twisted her expression. "No," she gasped. "You cannot take him again." I reached out carefully. She pressed herself against the window and screamed. The whole cabin turned toward us. "Sarah, this is Toby," I said. "You saved him. He is safe." "Liar." Before I could say another word, she lunged from her seat and reached for our son. Sarah hit me with enough force to drive my shoulder into the cabin wall. I turned sideways to protect Toby while she clawed at the straps of his carrier. "Give him back," she cried. I stayed. "I did what you wanted. Give him back." 2 passengers stood to help, but I shouted for them to stay away. Sarah did not understand where she was. In her mind, she was still in that underground cell. I caught her wrists, then immediately regretted it. The moment I restrained her, panic took complete control. She fought like someone who believed she would die if she stopped. So I released her. I sat on the floor, raised both hands, and began singing the simple lullaby Sarah used to hum at home. We had written the words together as a joke when we were first married. Rest now, little bird, the storm is passing. I will stay until the morning comes. Sarah froze. I sang it again more slowly. Her breathing began to ease. She stared at me as if my face were emerging through fog. Then she reached forward and touched my jaw. David. I could not answer. I was crying too hard. She collapsed against me, and I wrapped one arm around her while keeping the other around Toby. For the first time, the three of us were together. Then a man in a dark blue suit pushed through the curtain from the front galley. He was about 50, broad-shouldered, with a military haircut and a hard black medical case in his hand. When he saw Sarah in my arms, he did not look surprised, he looked furious. Step away from that patient, he ordered. He introduced himself as Dr. Elias Trent, a physician working under a Department of Defense contract. He claimed Sarah was a traumatized detainee named Julia Hart, and that I was confusing her with my dead wife. Sarah's entire body tightened when she heard his voice. He gives me the needle, she whispered. Trent opened the medical case and removed a syringe. I stood between him and my family. You are not touching her. He showed me a federal identification card and a packet of transfer documents. The papers looked official, but the photograph labeled Julia Hart was clearly Sarah. Trent spoke calmly to the passengers. This woman is unstable and dangerous. The gentleman is experiencing an emotional crisis. Please return to your seats. For a moment, his confidence almost worked. Then Emily returned with a woman from row 9. The woman held up a badge and identified herself as Naomi Reyes, a federal air marshal. Reyes asked Trent to place the syringe on the floor. He refused. Sarah gripped my sweater. Do not let him take the ring. Trent's eyes moved to her hand. That tiny movement told Reyes everything she needed to know. She stepped closer. Trent suddenly swung the medical case into her shoulder and reached for Sarah. I blocked him. He drove his elbow into my ribs, but Reyes recovered quickly. Within seconds, she had him face down in the aisle and secured with plastic restraints. When she examined the syringe, she found a sedative dose strong enough to be dangerous for someone as thin and weak as Sarah. The captain announced that we were diverting to boys for a medical emergency. Trent laughed from the floor. You have no idea what you are interfering with, he said. When we land, she goes back into federal custody. Sarah began shaking again. I held her hand and asked where she had been. Her answer came in broken pieces. She remembered the prison collapsing. She had survived by crawling into a drainage tunnel. 3 weeks later, a recovery team found her. The men wore American uniforms, so she believed she was safe. She was wrong. Instead of taking her to a military hospital, they moved her to a private facility in Montana. They kept the lights on at all hours, drugged her, and demanded to know where she had hidden something called the lantern file. For 8 months, the military told me she was dead, while someone connected to our own government kept her locked away. Who did this? I asked. Sarah looked toward Trent, who had stopped smiling. Colonel Adrian Harrow, she said. My commanding officer. The name struck me like another collision. Harrow was the officer who had delivered Toby to my house. He had stood in my living room, held my son, and told me Sarah died a hero. Sarah turned the ivy ring around her finger until the oversized leaf faced upward. She pressed its edge with her thumbnail. There was a soft click. A piece of silver no larger than a grain of rice slid into her palm. He thinks the evidence died with me, she whispered. This is why he kept me alive. Outside the window, the lights of Boyce rose through the darkness. Inside the cabin, Trent looked at the tiny piece of silver and spoke in a quiet voice. None of you will leave that airport with her. Flight 402 landed in Boise 20 minutes later. Through the window, I saw 3 black vehicles waiting beside the gate. 6 men in plain clothes stood near them. They had arrived too quickly. The captain kept the aircraft door closed while Reyes contacted local police. Trent insisted the men outside were a lawful Defense Department recovery team. He knew their names without checking any paperwork. Reyes looked at me and quietly said, That means they are either legitimate, or they were expecting you. The boys' police reached the gate first. Reyes handed Trent over to them and demanded civilian paramedics for Sarah. The men beside the black vehicles argued with the captain, but local officers would not allow them onto the plane. Sarah was taken to Riverbend Medical Center under police guard. Toby and I rode beside her in the ambulance. She held 2 of my fingers the entire way, as if letting go would send her back into the dark. Doctors found severe dehydration, untreated fractures, chemical burns, and signs of long-term sedation. None of those injuries matched the transfer record Trent had carried. According to his paperwork, Sarah had entered his care only 2 days earlier and had no known family. The lie was already breaking. Shortly before dawn, an investigator named Lena Park arrived from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. She had been contacted after Ray's reported suspicious federal documents and the assault on the plane. I did not trust her uniform, her badge, or her calm voice. Sarah did not trust her either. Park understood. She placed her weapon and phone outside the room, gave us the number of a federal judge, and told the boy's police captain to verify her identity through an independent channel. Only after the judge confirmed that Park had been investigating Colonel Harrow for 6 months did we agree to listen. Park told us Harrow controlled a classified intelligence unit and approved private security contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. 3 people who questioned his spending had died in supposed accidents. A 4th had disappeared. That 4th person was Sarah. Sarah opened her hand and showed Park the silver memory wafer from her ring. Before her final mission, Sarah had discovered payments moving from a contractor called Blackridge Global into accounts controlled by Harrow's brother. Blackridge earned money whenever violence increased in the region. Harrow had been selling flight routes and operation times to a militia, then awarding Blackridge the contracts to repair the damage. Sarah copied the payment records, radio logs, and mission orders. She hid the encrypted data in her ring because she feared her office had been compromised. 3 days later, her helicopter was shot down along the exact route Harrow had ordered at the last minute. "He did not expect me to survive," Sarah said. Her voice was weak, but each word was clear. When the rescue team found Toby, Harrow told them I was buried in the collapse. Later, his private recovery crew found me alive in the tunnel. He moved me before anyone could report it. The private facility in Montana was not a hospital. It was an abandoned training center leased through 3 shell companies. Trent drugged her. Harrow questioned her through a speaker, so she could not see him. He wanted the lantern file, but Sarah never told them it was inside the ring. "Why put her on a commercial flight?" I asked. Park explained that her investigation had come too close to the Montana facility. Harrow was moving Sarah to a new location near the Canadian border. A private aircraft would have created a record Park could trace, so Trent placed her under a false name on an ordinary passenger flight. By impossible chance, he chose the same flight as Toby and me. Or so we thought. While Sarah slept, I picked up Toby's wooden teething ring from the hospital chair. Colonel Harrow had given it to me the night he brought Toby home. He said it was a gift from Sarah's unit. The toy felt unusually warm. My years in cybersecurity had taught me that small details often exposed large lies. I borrowed a screwdriver from a maintenance worker and removed a decorative wooden cap. Inside was a battery, a cellular transmitter, and a GPS module. Harrow had been tracking my son for 8 months. He knew we were leaving Maryland. He knew our flight number. Trent had not chosen Flight 402 by chance. Harrow had put Sarah behind us to move both problems at once. Probably planning to make our deaths look like a family tragedy after we landed, Park photographed the tracker and placed it inside a shielded evidence bag. At that moment, the lights in Sarah's room went out. The emergency lamps flashed red. A nurse screamed in the hallway. Then 2 men wearing military police jackets pushed through the stairwell door with a transfer order and a locked medical stretcher. They said a national security directive gave them custody of Sarah. Park asked for the judge's name on the order. They drew their weapons. Boys' officers returned fire from behind the nurse's station. 1 attacker was wounded. The other fled down the stairs but was captured in the parking garage. Neither man was military police. Both worked for Blackridge Global. The transfer order carried Colonel Harrow's digital signature. Park looked at me over the flashing emergency lights. "We have evidence of kidnapping and attempted murder," she said. "But Harrow will call that signature a forgery. If we want the man who ordered this, we need him to move where we can see him." From the hospital bed, Sarah opened her eyes. "Then we give him what he wants," she said. She closed her fingers around the empty space where her ring had been. "We give him the lantern file." Park moved us to a secure floor while federal agents processed the hospital attack. A forensic technician connected Sarah's silver memory wafer to an isolated computer and made 3 exact copies. The file required a passphrase. Sarah looked at me. "The last line of our song." I typed, "I will stay until the morning comes." The screen filled with records. There were bank transfers, encrypted messages, flight routes, and recordings of command meetings. In one recording, Harrow ordered Sarah's helicopter onto the route where it was later attacked. When another officer warned that the rope was exposed, Harrow replied, "Losses are acceptable. The contract is not." There was also a video from the Montana facility. It showed Sarah being carried through a hallway on a stretcher while Trent signed a false death certificate. I watched only 10 seconds before anger made my hands shake. Park copied the evidence to the FBI, a federal judge, and the Justice Department. Sarah asked for a fourth copy to be sent to an investigative reporter she trusted. If anyone tried to bury the case, the public would see everything. That was the moment our revenge stopped being a dream and became a plan. We were not going to hurt Harrow. We were going to take away the things he valued most: his authority, his reputation, his money, and his freedom. However, the evidence still had a weakness. Harrow could claim Sarah had created the files before her mission or altered them after capture. Prosecutors needed proof that he was directing the crimes in the present. The attack at the hospital gave us that chance. One of the captured Blackridge men refused to speak. The other asked for a lawyer. Trent was equally silent. But Reyes had seized Trent's phone before the plane landed, and Park's team found an encrypted messaging application on it. Harrow had sent a message only minutes before the hospital blackout. Move the woman. Recover the ring. Remove the family. The order was strong evidence, but the account used a code name. Park wanted Harrow to identify himself through his own actions. We built a trap around the tracker hidden in Toby's toy. Agents reactivated its signal and placed it inside a rented house outside Boise. The house looked isolated, but cameras covered every entrance. FBI agents waited in the trees and inside a neighboring barn. A federal prosecutor monitored the operation from a command vehicle. Park sent a message from Trent's phone saying Sarah Toby, and I had been moved to that address. She added that I had found the ring but did not understand what it contained. Harrow answered 12 minutes later, "Keep them alive until I arrive." He was flying from Washington, D.C. on a military transport. While we waited, Harrow struck back. A false national security alert appeared in federal databases accusing me of abducting a protected witness. Sarah's identity was marked as classified, and the hospital received an order forbidding staff from confirming she existed. News reports described me as a grieving widower suffering a dangerous breakdown. For several hours, the lie moved faster than the truth. My sister called from Seattle in tears. Reporters surrounded her home. Social media filled with strangers calling me unstable and accusing me of using my baby in a kidnapping. I nearly broke. Sarah took my hand. She was lying in a hospital bed, weak enough to need help sitting up, yet she was the one comforting me. "This is how he wins," she said. "He makes honest people feel alone." We recorded Sarah's statement on 3 cameras. She gave her name, rank, service number, and details only her unit would know. She described the prison, Toby's birth, the rescue, and the Montana facility. She held up the medical scans showing old fractures and repeated injection marks. Then she looked directly into the lens. "Colonel Harrow, I survived the enemy you sold me to. I survived the prison you built for me at home. I will survive your lies." The reporter released a short portion of the video after the FBI confirmed Sarah's identity. Public pressure changed everything. Members of Congress demanded answers. Harrow's false alert was suspended. Military investigators who had been afraid to speak began calling Park. One officer provided a recording of Harrow ordering Sarah's death status to remain unchanged after her recovery. Another turned over the original passenger request that placed Trent and Sarah directly behind Toby and me on Flight 402. Harrow had wanted Trent to drug Sarah, kill me after landing, and deliver Toby to a private institution under a false name. He planned to call it a murder, suicide caused by my grief. Knowing that made me want to abandon the trap and stay beside my family. Sarah would not allow it. "If he disappears tonight, we will spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders," she said. "Finish it." Park fitted me with a recording device and drove me to the rented house. I carried a decoy ring in my pocket. The real wafer remained locked in federal evidence. At 1:13 in the morning, a black sport utility vehicle stopped outside. Colonel Adrian Harrow stepped out wearing civilian clothes. 2 Blackridge guards followed him. FBI agents watched but did not move. Harrow had to make his purpose clear. He entered the house and found me sitting alone at the kitchen table. For a few seconds, we simply stared at each other. This was the man who had held my newborn son in my living room. This was the man who had watched me cry while he described my wife's death. He closed the door and gave me the same sympathetic expression he had worn that night. "David," he said, "you should have accepted the flag." The Harrow sat across from me, as if we were 2 old friends settling a private disagreement. One of his guards remained by the front door. The other walked through the house, checking each room. "Where is Sarah?" Harrow asked. "Somewhere you cannot reach her." His smile disappeared. He told me Sarah had made a mistake by investigating operations above her clearance. He described the leaked missions as necessary choices that protected larger interests. The people who died became numbers in a report. The money from Blackridge, he claimed, the funded work Congress would never approve but the country still needed. You sold American service members to armed groups, I said. I managed outcomes. That cold answer destroyed the last doubt in me. Harrow did not see himself as a criminal. He believed power had placed him beyond ordinary judgment. I asked why he put Sarah on our flight. He leaned back in his chair. You were leaving the only address where we could control you. Sarah had to be moved. Combining the problems was efficient. You were going to kill us. You were a grieving husband who could not live without his wife. The public understands stories like that. Your son would have disappeared into a protected program, and everyone would have moved on. My nails pressed into my palms under the table. Every part of me wanted to cross the room and hit him. Instead, I remembered Sarah's words, "Finish it," and the hospital, I asked. An unfortunate failure by a contractor acting on your order. Harrow smiled again. You cannot prove who sent a message from a coded account. I placed the decoy ring on the table, his eyes fixed on it. This is what you came for, I said. Tell your men to leave, and I will give it to you. A Harrow motioned toward the guards. They stepped outside but remained close to the door. He picked up the ring and pressed the large ivy leaf. The compartment opened. It was empty. His face changed. The patient officer vanished, and the frightened criminal underneath finally appeared. Where is the wafer? A small screen on the kitchen counter turned on. Sarah appeared through a secure video connection from the hospital. She looked pale and exhausted, but her voice was steady. It is with the FBI, Adrian. Harrow stood so quickly that his chair fell backward. For the first time since the mission, Sarah faced the man who had destroyed our lives. You should have died in that tunnel, he said, but I did not. I kept you alive because I believed you would eventually tell me where you hid it. You kept me in Montana. I kept you where no one would hear you. And you ordered the attack at the hospital. I ordered professionals to clean up a disaster. They failed, just like Trent failed on the plane. Every word traveled through my recording device to the agents outside. Park's voice came quietly through the receiver hidden in my ear. We have enough. Move away from him. I stood and stepped back. Harrow saw the wire beneath my shirt. He reached inside his jacket. The front door burst open before he could draw his weapon, and FBI agents entered from both sides of the house. Harrow's guards were forced to the ground outside. Park crossed the kitchen, removed a pistol from Harrow's hand, and placed him in restraints. He looked at me with pure hatred. Do you think this changes anything? He shouted. People like me decide what truth survives. Sarah heard him through the screen. Not this time, she said. The investigation spread far beyond one tunnel. Blackridge offices in 4 states were searched. Hidden detention records were recovered from the Montana facility. Several officials resigned, and others were charged. Families who had been told that their loved ones died in random attacks finally learned that their missions had been sold for profit. Trent eventually agreed to testify. He admitted drugging Sarah and creating false medical records. His testimony connected Harrow directly to the prison and the planned murder on Flight 402. 11 months later, I sat beside Sarah in a federal courtroom. She was stronger by then, though sudden noises still made her flinch. Toby slept in my arms while the jury returned guilty verdicts for kidnapping, conspiracy, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and other crimes. Harrow was stripped of his rank and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Blackridge lost its government contracts, and its seized money was placed into a fund for the families harmed by the scheme. Before sentencing, Sarah was allowed to speak. She did not ask the judge for cruelty. She did not shout. She simply looked at Harrow and said, "You believed my fear made me weak. It did not. It kept me alive long enough to bring you into the light." That was our revenge. Harrow would wake every morning knowing the woman he erased had survived, spoken, and taken away everything his crimes had bought him. Justice did not heal Sarah overnight. Recovery was not a straight road. Some nights she woke believing she was back in the cell. Sometimes Toby's crying triggered memories she could not explain. We attended therapy separately and together. I learned not to touch her without warning during a panic attack. She learned that asking for help was not surrender. Slowly our home became a home instead of a recovery room. On Toby's 2nd birthday, he took 3 unsteady steps across our living room toward Sarah. She dropped to her knees and opened her arms. When he reached her, he touched the silver ivy ring she had begun wearing again. Sarah looked at me over his head. There were tears in her eyes, but this time they came with a smile. For years, I thought courage meant facing danger without fear. Sarah taught me something different. Courage is carrying fear with you and still choosing the next step. It is telling the truth after powerful people order silence. It is rebuilding a family when grief has already taken the house apart. The military once gave me a flag and asked me to accept that Sarah was gone. I keep that flag folded in a wooden case, not as a symbol of her death, but as a reminder of the lie we refused to live under. They buried her name to protect their secrets. In the end, her name became the truth that buried them.